Hello, friend. Welcome to the walled garden. Grab a comfy seat, settle in, and let's go on a little adventure. Um, it looks like it's going to be a bit of a bumpy adventure. So I'm curious to see where we end up. So, the past couple days, I've had this urge or inclination to do a reading about storms. So in the US, it's been a week of some weird weather. There have been a lot of storms, and oddly behaving storms at that. Um, and I don't know, I felt the energy of storms this week, even though most of the time I wasn't actually getting any physical storms. I had that energy and the sense that there was a reading here. But I sat down to do it a couple of times and just I don't know, I couldn't find it. It wasn't ready yet. So um, today it felt full. It felt ready. So I sat down and did a little bit of meditation and decided that I'd pull a couple of oracle cards out first just to get a feel for the energy um, before pulling the tarot. And this is what came out. So in both cases, for both of these decks, first of all, the top deck, um, it doesn't have a book, so it's just, do what you will with the words. And it's one that I don't use a whole lot. I don't know. It has specific use cases, and for some reason it felt relevant today. So my goal was to pull three cards, and four came out. So we were already off to an interesting start. And then the same thing happened with these Kim Crane's archetype cards. I was like, all right, let's see if we can get three, and four came out. And then I read through those and was definitely getting a flavor. And then when I laid them out, in both cases, in the order that they came out, there's definitely a lot of interplay between them. So my plan, best laid plans, right? So my plan was actually not to discuss the oracles at first. It was really just to sort of set a foundation and a flavor before we dug into the tarot. But I think that's not the plan anymore. So because I think this is probably going to feed into wherever we end up going with the tarot. So let's take a look here. So the first card, and again, seeing that I have the energy of storms in mind, this one isn't really a surprise. Crisis. I think it's interesting. So we've got these hands sort of coming out of the water, and this figure in the boat. Are those coins? They look like coins. But it looks like he might be throwing them. So I don't know if that's some sort of offering to the storm, to these hands that are making the waves. Let's see, how many of these do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have 15. I don't know if that number is significant to you, but we're talking about storms, so no surprise there is some sort of crisis energy. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you're literally in a crisis, but it's that tumult, that being on a rough sea in a little boat kind of vibe, which I find very interesting because the first Kim Crane's card to come out was Ocean, which in and of itself, oceans and storms go together, and that's where we see, some of the biggest and most destructive storms is on the ocean. But then pairing this with crisis is interesting. Up next is inner strength. So again, from a if you're dealing with a storm of any variety, it's probably going to involve some inner strength. So no real surprises there. But I thought, again, so we've got this tangle of both branches and roots. And then with the dead end, we've got that tangle sort of replicated. Change, again, we're talking about a storm, no surprise here. And threshold, I think that also makes a lot of sense. And I thought it was interesting the way these line up. You've got someone standing here, and then you've got, feet down here, sort of on that threshold. And then this one might seem a little bit contradictory, but I think I know where it's headed. So say less and the poet. So I want to dive into the book for the Kim Crayons, and then we're going to sort of connect the dots here as we go. And then we'll get into the tarot as planned. Okay, so we got 30. Okay, so the ocean, the unconscious, the depths, the incomprehensible. The power of the ocean is unmatched. To step into its salty waters is to step into the unknown. So I think it's interesting already. We've got like salty. Some of you might be feeling salty. But salty waters, I was just thinking tears. So if you're going through some sort of storm, often that involves some degree of crying. And then ocean, water, it's associated with deep emotions. So that aligns metaphorically. By its sheer volume, the ocean represents the unconscious, all that is beyond our understanding. We cannot live within the ocean. We cannot claim it, manage it, or own it. It rejects our every attempt to dominate nature. Yet amid its overwhelming power, it calls to us, inspires us, and invigorates our life on land. It dissolves the little us into the big us. When the energy of the ocean is present, there is change stirring that is beyond any change you've known before. So I think that's interesting because of the vastness of the ocean. It can create an awe and even a panic that's different from other situations or other bodies of water. And so a storm on the ocean, it hits different, especially if you're in a boat. But it's not necessarily bad or dangerous. So if you're in the middle of the ocean and you can't see land, it's that can be triggering in terms of panic for a lot of people. Like you have this, oh my God, like I'm in the middle of nowhere, I can't see anything. But nothing's necessarily wrong. It's just unfamiliar. And so I think part of what's happening here is this crisis. Things might seem worse than they are just because of the magnitude of the change. The change that is happening, these waves, it's unlike a change you've known before. And so the magnitude of that, the foreignness of it, makes you feel like it's a crisis, but it's not necessarily. It's just substantial. So returning to the book, the ego must dissolve. So this reminds me, I've had a song stuck in my head. It pops up lately in the middle of the night. The artist's name is Jensen. I think it's Jensen McRae. Pardon me, I believe it's MCRAE. And it's called My Ego Dies at the End. Beautiful song. But it keeps sorry, I tickled my throat. It keeps popping up, and I've been, not terribly sure why. And then as soon as I got into this, I was like, okay, that's all related. The saline swells work on your very cells, your fibers, your deepest underlying beliefs. Like Aphrodite, we rise from the ocean's froth, a new being. Life is change. Let the waves crash. So again, the saline swells. So saline is just salt water. So again, we're back to tears. There's an Irish proverb. I don't know the exact wording, but it's something like um, something to the effect of water cures everything. There isn't anything that either the ocean, a cup of tea, or a good cry can't fix. Um, so there's something about this surrendering to the water, whether it's the tears, the change, the feelings, letting it change your cells. And I think, especially with crying, it has a physiological impact as well as an emotional one. So crying isn't just it's not just like a byproduct of feelings. It's doing its own work of releasing things. And I think there's definitely a surrender here. And so going back to this card, the person in the boat is assuming a posture of surrender. Like his hands are up and open, and that last coin or whatever seems to be floating out of his hand. He's not like hurling it into the water, he's just surrendering. Um, and actually, if you look at the sort of wave hands, even though you get the impression that they're sort of causing the tumult or the waves, they're sort of in a passive posture. So I think there's really a lot here around surrendering. Um, and this came up in a reading before, but Bruce Lee's thing on being water. There's something around like water flows. It doesn't fight the conditions or the container it's in. And so I think there's something here about surrender. Um, let's see. Study waves, touch their surface, get in the water no matter where you live. Each drop is part of the whole. The ocean is in every tear. The ocean displays every emotion without shame. To witness its glassy moonlit surface and its unforgiving storms is to know the full spectrum of the human experience. So I think there's definitely something here on meditating with water, especially if you can get in water. You know, a bathtub, a lake, a river, the ocean, a kiddie pool in your backyard. There's something around that proximity to water. And, you know, again, like when you're sitting in water, you can use your hand, if there isn't a naturally occurring wave, to manipulate the surface to create waves. And I think there's something there. Also, think it's interesting that the word storm, came out organically in that. Okay, so the dead end, the closed door, the final chapter, the impasse. Contrary to what its name implies, the dead end is very much alive. It is a force that stopped us from moving forward as planned. It's thick, dense, uncompromising, a wall beyond all walls. With every bramble, thorn, and stone, it simply states, "No more, child, you have reached the last page of this chapter." It's natural to resist its very resistance and struggle even harder to make our way to prove our point, to hold on to what was. In this way, we fight with life itself. From a mythic perspective, the end you face is very much a beginning. There are doors opening all around you, just not the one you planned on walking through. If you are honest and courageous enough to accept, adjust, and adapt, the dead end becomes known as life's beginning. So I think, I was just talking about surrender, and that's sort of the point of this is don't fight. I think there's also something here around perspective. So it says that there are doors all around you, just not the one you were planning on. And I think, like, as humans, we like control. We like planning. This is what we're doing. And sometimes the universe has other ideas, and we can get so caught up on basically being pissed that it's not the way we planned, that we fail to see what else is there, what comes from the rerouting. So I think there's something around this surrender of taking a look around and getting a new perspective. So a couple of more ocean metaphors are coming through here. So they say that if you get pulled under by a wave or like a riptide or whatever, and I'm not giving you advice, this is my understanding of it, your instinct is to fight, to thrash, and that's actually like the worst thing you can do. You're supposed to surrender and let the wave pass, and then you'll surface naturally, hopefully. But that thrashing is basically the worst thing you can do, but it is counterintuitive. And so I think there's some of that here. It's like you want to fight, you want to resist it, but the thing you need to do is to relax, to surrender into it. I can't remember. I think it's the Irish myth of Cuchulainn. But there's a mythology where this old warrior ends up at one point in the surf, in the ocean, with his sword, like fighting the waves, basically. And I mean, there's like a poetic element to that, but it's the futility of it. These waves are so powerful, and it doesn't matter how strong you are, how good your sword is, you can't fight them that way. Like, it's not possible. So again, surrendering and releasing and getting a new perspective. Let me see if there's anything else here. There's a lot of door imagery in here, so that may mean something to you. You may be dealing with something that literally involves doors, moving, or you may be looking at different options for things, and the one you had planned on isn't working out. Go deeper. Kenny Rogers, the gambler. Donny Hathaway is giving up. Great artisan songs. So those are like two fun assignments, I guess. But like the gambler, you gotta know when to hold them, know when to fold them. So it's knowing when to fight and when to let go. And I think the point of the cards is like, this is a moment of letting go. Okay, so let's look at the threshold, the door, the gate, the initiation. So again, doors coming up. The doors may be significant to you for some reason. There's definitely a door portal thing. But again, thresholds, like door can work a couple of different ways. So you can have doors that are open to you as like different options, but when you cross a threshold, that's also like passing through a door. We cross thresholds continually, consciously and unconsciously. Doorways, gates, and entryways grace our path on a daily basis. When this card arises, it signifies that the precipice you stand upon is not your typical one, however. You have arrived at a threshold of initiation, here to usher you into a new reality. It requires you to leave behind the you that you thought was so well formed. A new frontier calls. This is not easy work. Threshold initiation means a part of you will be lost in order to make space for what is next. A metaphorical death must occur. Some may not recognize you. You may struggle to recognize yourself. The ground seems to crumble as you free fall into your new reality. This is the liminal realm. One step, dear friend. Just take that one necessary step toward the future that calls you. So that ground crumbling, unsteady ground, it's the same as the ocean. The ocean is volatile, it is fluid, it is moving. So you don't have that sturdiness that we like under you. Part of you has to be lost, this metaphorical death. So that song that I referenced, the ego dies, my ego dies at the end. It talks about ego death in the song. So I think that could be part of this resistance. You know, you see this hand here. It can be hard to change, to do that kind of change as a person, especially if it's if it's not something you sought out. You know, so if this storm, if this circumstance is unexpected, or you know, you thought you were headed in one direction and the storm is put you in another direction, it's really unsettling to have that sort of internal collapse, really. And even though it's headed somewhere better, and the fact that, you know, we're not as finite and well formed as we tend to think. Like the ocean, we're fluid, we're always changing, but our concept of ourselves is that we're not. We think we're stable and consistent. You know, but and even though we have patterns, like when you look at somebody else from the outside, even though they think they're steady and consistent and, you know, always behave or show up a certain way, you can see inconsistencies in that often from the outside that they don't see, you know, from the inside. So this idea that we have this like hard formed finite self is an illusion, and letting go of that is it's it does a number on your brain. And so like this change is, you are at the threshold of some type of serious change. Now again, the thing about all of this is you do have some degree of agency in it. So the way that what I'm seeing so far from the cards is that you probably didn't choose this situation, the way you don't usually choose a storm. It shows up and it happens to you. So while you're not choosing that, you do have a choice in terms of how you perceive the situation and what you do with it. You can resist it. You can, you know, keep trying to beat down that closed door. But what I'm seeing here is you're being called to something bigger, something more powerful. If you have the courage to do that. So the crisis isn't a crisis so much as it is creating the circumstances to usher in this change. Okay, let's look at the poet real quick. So what's coming through already for me on this is that there is some sort of expression here for you that you are being called to. That's part of this change. For a lot of folks, I think it is going to be artistic. It may not be poetry or writing necessarily, though I think that's definitely a possibility. I think there is some sort of opportunity for you to channel this into something. So the poet, we have the artist, the witness, the truth teller. The poet's work is to feel immensely and not be afraid. So I want to start with that because I think that can be really helpful in guiding you through this process, because I get the feeling you're in the storm. You're not on the other side of the storm. And so again, if you go into this process not fighting and not resisting it and just trying to take it all in and move through it, sort of with that being pulled under by the tide analogy, that's going to help you get to this position, to this ability to express it. So you have sort of a challenge being issued to you to feel the fullness of this storm, of this emotion, but not be afraid. So the poet must seek out truth in the darkest corners of the world and carry it back for all to see. This unique capacity resides within us all, regardless of our relationship to creativity. When the poet energy is present, there's a call for deep honesty and reflection, for seeing the big picture within the little one. So there we have that big and little again. The ocean, it talked about dissolving the little us into the big us. So there's something happening there for you. It could also be about like details. There could be, this situation could be doing something larger, and you have to be careful not to get focused on, the sort of mundane details. The poet rides effortlessly between the personal and universal. It's possible that others may not seem to listen or care about the poet's work, but do not be discouraged. The words of the poet ring true for centuries to come, soothing the wounds of despair and violence that capture our world. The poet's work is never finished. Find your voice and trust that the wind will carry it. Okay, so then why do we have say less here? So I think when we're in a storm, when we're in a crisis, when we're in a difficult situation, there's a tendency to fly off the handle. That can be anger, sadness, self-righteousness, whatever. That can be directed at a specific person that's involved in the situation. It could be posting on social media. It could be just, talking crap to people. But there's this very human urge to narrate, to tell the story that's happening, to give words to what's happening to you, to articulate like how you're being wronged if that's the case. If there is, another person, to tell them what they've gotten wrong, or give them a piece of your mind, as we say. But the thing is, when you're in the storm, when you're in it, when you're in the depths of these emotions, you're not thinking clearly. You're not your best self. And it's a more reactive place. And I don't know, I'm really getting, these hands are really reminding me of the Disney Little Mermaid, when Ariel gives up her voice. It's like that green smoke that looks kind of like this, except it's green. And it I think the smoke is green. Something is green. I think her voice is gold and the smoke is green, but I could be wrong. But regardless, oh my gosh. Sorry, a huge hawk just flew down into my little backyard. I live in a city. That's never happened before. So that may be significant for some reason. But anyway, so the smoke comes and takes this little, gold thing that's her voice and removes it. And I don't know, this is giving that energy to me. And that's not to say that the thoughts and feelings you're having when you're in that sort of storm energy, that they're not valid, that they're not accurate. They're just charged, first of all, but they're also not the whole story. They're usually, when we're in that sort of storm energy, it's fast moving, it's reactive, it's not looking at the whole picture, it's not being level-headed. And so I think there's a suggestion here to literally say less as you're moving through the storm. And that's not to say, again, that those thoughts and feelings aren't valid. That's not to say you shouldn't capture them somehow. But the point isn't for you, I don't know, to me, this is when somebody's upset about anything, this could be a relationship, this could be a work crisis. This could be a community dispute. Like, I can think of so many things, and like, this is the vibe, especially if you're either the person receiving it or you're observing it. You know, like when you watch somebody and they just sort of, like, I feel like we see it a lot on social. You watch somebody sort of lose their mind and you're like, oh, you're probably going to feel differently about having that on the internet in a couple weeks. So it's that energy of let it settle, move through it, and then do something constructive with it. Because this does say find your voice, truth teller. So I think there is something constructive you're meant to do with it. And I love, like, this dark shadow becomes all of these birds and they're flying into this, you know, beautiful sunsetty kind of energy. And again, we have that hawk, and now we've got more birds. Butterfly, so I don't know if like wings, birds, have any significance for you, but there's something about this process and like allowing the process and then doing something with it in a sort of thoughtful, constructive way at the end. Like, I think it's really interesting that this card came out in both cases. These cards came out last as like sort of an afterthought. I didn't really want 4 cards. I wanted 3. So it's like, this is the storm, this is the process, and then this is sort of where you're going with that. So, all right, that's our sort of underpinning. Let's pop over the tarot and see if we can get a little bit more about the crisis itself. I wonder if we can like keep these up here. That would be nice, in case they become relevant as we go. Okay. All right. So, what do we need to know? What do you need to know about this storm? Sorry, I just painted my nails and like technically they're dry. But it always makes me shuffle weird because I'm afraid of screwing them up, because it never fails. Like, you think they're dry and then you do something and find out, no, they're not. Okay, so let's learn a little bit more. I feel like we've got this actually ended up being almost guidance for the storm. So now it's like, I'd like to get a little bit more about the storm. Okay. Liberation. That's pretty specific. Again, but given all this other imagery, I think that makes sense. We've got 8 of coins or 8 of pentacles. Nope, that one doesn't want to come out. What else? I don't know about this storm. The Hanged one. Ooh. Okay. High Priestess and the Teacher. Alright, I want more. I want some deets on this. Okay, so we got the 2 of coins, 6 of swords, the Lovers, Mastery of coins, which is the King of Pentacles in this deck. Alright. And the 7 of Wands. Okay. So I love working with the books because of the wordplay, but I'm gonna start and just see what we see, and then we'll get into the books if we have to. So everybody, make sure everybody's visible. They're not straight, but close enough. Okay, so actually, Liberation is the one I actually do want to read, because it's a bit of a variation in this deck. So that's normally Judgment, and I think that's a really interesting switch. So, Rebirth, Forgiveness, Awakening. The card of spiritual awakening and freeing the soul. Throw off the limiting pressures of judgment from self or others and unfurl into your divine self. This is a sign that it is time for self forgiveness, that a deep awakening is upon you. You are understanding your wholeness and sovereignty and connection to all. You are having a spiritual level up, which may come with emotional and physical release. You are worthy, know thyself. Okay, so whatever crisis you're experiencing, I think times of crisis aren't normally when we feel great about ourselves. And so I think there's really a message here to trust, and we already had this coming up before, but this is happening for your benefit. This is for your growth. That doesn't mean you have to love it or feel good about it, but it is happening for you. It's a good thing. And I love how it almost looks like she's dancing out of this flower. And here we've got butterfly wings again. So butterflies, and we've got dragonflies, owls, lots of winged creatures coming up. I'm trying to decide if I want to go across or go all the way down. All right, let's just go down. So Two of Coins, Two of Pentacles, that's balance. So I think especially if we look at where we started with that sort of boat on the sea, that rough ocean, rough boat, nothing, if you've ever been on a boat in any kind of storm, nothing about that feels balanced. You can't tell sometimes which end is up. And so I think this is a sort of challenge for you to find balance. So when we're in any sort of storm, so this could be trouble at work, relationship difficulty, like I said, community, problems with your neighbors, or school, local politics, any sort of storm. And honestly, actually, this could also just be an internal storm. So especially if you are dealing with either mental health issues or grief, or really heavy shadow work, working through things. When you're in that, it feels like being on a boat in a storm. It's really hard to, I want to say, see the forest for the trees. And again, we're back to that, seeing the big picture, not the little tiny detail. So it can be really hard to find balance. And because, like, pentacles, yes, they can be like money and profession and like those sort of material things, but I actually think this is just more grounded in like a human sense of like, find a balance, drink water, get enough sleep, make sure you're eating, go outside, get some sunlight, touch grass, get your feet in the dirt, do things that fill you up normally, even if you can't feel them right now. So like if you I think, so being out in nature, as I watch some storm energy blow through the trees in my yard right now, maybe you normally love being in nature, but whatever you're going through, you're just retreating. You're not feeling it. Go do it anyway. Go stand outside. Touch some plants, look at a tree, go for a walk. It's okay if you're not feeling it right now. And I think, so we see the infinity symbol, or a limniscate, and there's there's a motion to that. So it's like there's an energetic dance happening. And so what you put in is going to come back eventually. So again, we have this like motion of the tides. Put the energy into balance, even if you're not feeling it yet. Act as if. And eventually those actions, that energy is going to come back and help balance you out. So next up we have 8 of coins or 8 of pentacles. And I love how they're like buttons in this deck. I don't know why, but I really enjoy that. So 8 of coins is like diligence to a craft, a skill. It's putting in the time. For some of you, like there could be something that you need to, there could be something new. So there could be a new skill that will help you get through this. You either already know what that is, or it will make itself clear. If you're like, I have no idea what new skill, then that's not yours. Don't worry about it. For some of you, this artistic, whatever the artistic element is, that's part of how you find that balance, So we've got these 2 pentacles. You take 2 of these buttons and put them over there. So part of how you find that balance is putting in that consistent, steady, routine effort into that practice. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just about the routine and the diligence of like committing to that thing. And I think like going back to inner strength, I think that's definitely a way to build up strength is through routine, through continuing to work on something, especially if it helps you sort of grow or develop over time. If you can see progress, or even just being proud of yourself for showing up repeatedly, like that's a way to sort of replenish your internal resources as you're going through this storm. But then going back to the dead end thing and all the different doors, whatever your storm is, the door that's closed, one of those other doors might be this, whatever this skill is. And from that we get the 6 of Swords, which we've got this beautiful rainbow, and it looks to me like the swords are like corroded, which I really love. So 6 of Swords is like moving to calmer waters. So she's like rowing her way toward that little rainbow. So I see this again as sort of what I was saying about what you're going to get back from that energy. So part of moving yourself, and this is funny too, so the calmer waters, like we're literally in a boat in the ocean in a storm, and this is moving to calmer waters. So part of how you're doing that is that diligence. And again, like this could be something small. Like this could be you're working in your garden. You know what I mean? This doesn't have to be like take up a new hobby, start a new career. I do think it's probably something tactile in some way. It's not going to be a strictly like intellectual exercise, just because that's how pentacles work, and there's a real like physical vibe to this. So it could be, so back to like making sure you're drinking water and eating, it could be cooking yourself a really nice dinner every day. Again, not fancy, but like made from scratch, something you love, taking the time and putting love into it. Like it doesn't have to be big. It's about the consistency and the energy that you're putting into it, and that's going to help you get to calmer waters. And I'm really interested by the corrosion of these swords for a couple of reasons. So one, swords in the tarot, like that's intellectual energy, so that's thinking. You're putting the swords down. This is not an intellectual exercise. I think that's really clear here. Put the swords down. But I also think what's interesting is like swords are for fighting, right? the swords don't work anymore and they're set down, so we're not fighting. Like, this storm is not about fighting, it's about surrendering and moving through. But I also think it's interesting because what corrodes metal? Water, especially like salt water. So back to emotion and tears, it's like you could look at that a couple ways. So one is that the emotion has corroded the swords, so like your thinking is clouded, tainted, corroded, your thinking. So remember how I said before that like we're almost never in the clearest headspace when we're going through a storm, whatever kind of storm it is. So like this could be a reminder that like your swords are not at their best because of because of the ocean, the emotion. But I also think it could just be your feelings have superseded your thinking, and not in a bad way, not in a like don't trust your thinking way, in a the feelings are more important here. She's in water, moving through water, and the swords are rusted. So, okay, next up we have the Hanged One. So we've got lots of pink flowers. They're pink roses in the back of this too. This tulip or whatever this is has pink at the bottom. So we've got lots of, and I mean additional flowers that aren't pink, but pink flowers specifically, and butterflies, birds. But anyway, so the Hanged One, especially, sort of lining up to where we are in the initial story here, I think Hanged One is often sort of being at an impasse. Now, sometimes that's viewed as sort of like a negative thing, like you don't know which way to go. But it can also be sort of suspending action. And so I think about when we talk, getting back to surrendering, rolling with the waves, like to me that definitely captures this energy, but also the say less. So it's not making a decision. It's not thinking. It's just not acting right now. And I think that's backed up here by the Lovers. So yes, the Lovers is Lovers. It's romantic. So for some of you, this could be a romantic situation, either a conflict, a breakup, somebody coming back and turning your life upside down. But the thing at the core of the Lovers is this duality. It's head and heart. It's using both of those to make a decision. And especially, I don't know, there's something for me about how these two are seated in the center of the tarot spread, and they feel like they stand out a little bit. They've got a darker, more unified background. So back here, like all of these, we've got like pictures happening in the background. This, we just sort of have like colors and textures, and the image in the front stands out. So to me, like this reads kind of like this. Like this is a sort of central focus, and it is suspending action. It's using your head and your heart. It's finding balance in how you're thinking. But the other use or meaning for the Hanged One can be looking at things from a new perspective. And so, again, when we're in that storm energy, getting knocked about in the boat, it's often like a tunnel vision. We're focused on what we're feeling, what we're seeing immediately. It's back to that big little forest for the trees. We're so focused on the little, we can't see the big. And so I think this is calling, so especially like if you imagine somebody suspended by their feet in the air, they have a different perspective. They have a higher perspective of what's going on. And again, if you think about, surrendering in the current, you have a different perspective. So I think this is also challenging you to surrender and look for that other perspective. It may not be, and we got that from the dead end too, how like it may seem like an ending, but it's actually a beginning. You just have to turn and see the other doors that are around you. So I think there's a real challenge here to see a new perspective. And when I say no perspective, I don't mean like a lot of times I think we think in binary when we don't need to. It's that like all or nothing, black or white. Either I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. You know, like things are very cut and dry. And that's not always the case. And so even though like the lovers, we've got a binary head and heart, we've got duality, two things. I do think it's, so if you think about dragonflies and how they move, they're really erratic, right? Like they pop over something else and then move to something else and then move to something else. They're constantly moving. And so I think there's something here around there aren't two options. You know, it's not like go through this door, you can't go through this door. It's not like this one thing or the other thing. There may be another broader, higher perspective that's beyond what you're seeing right now. And so that doesn't mean just look at the opposite of what you're seeing right now and that's the broader perspective. It means like, no man, like zoom all the way out. There's something totally different going on. But I think in order to do that, you have to be suspended. You have to be still. And so whether that's sitting in water, meditating, there needs to be some sort of stillness so that like if we think about the ocean storm metaphor again, letting the storm settle, letting the waters calm, and then assessing things, then looking for that bigger picture on the horizon. Okay, next up we have the High Priestess. So she is all about intuition and connecting with the divine, inner knowing. I think it's really interesting that when she comes out, it's not until after this piece. So your intuition, your inner knowing, it's here, but it comes after you suspend yourself, after you stop moving, stop talking. You got to find that stillness first. And so now that combined with the Mastery of Coins or the King of Coins. So it's got this little frog here. And frogs are often associated with like a couple of things. So like cleansing and communication. So especially like the croak sounds that they make. So like finding and speaking your truth. But then they're also associated with like rebirth and transformation, because they go from tadpoles to frogs. They're in between, right? Like they live in the water and on land. And so I think there's something here about like this is using your intuition to find your voice, whatever this expression is going to be eventually, to go through the transformation. But again, it happens later. It happens, you know, so the way these laid out, it happens after the threshold, not before it. So you hit this dead end, you can't go through the door you wanted to, but you're at a threshold, you're at a couple of them. There are other doors you can walk across, and at some point you walk across that threshold, you're undergoing the change, the transformation, but that's later in the process. You can't force that sooner. Now, King of Coins or King of Pentacles is like being the master of your domain in a really earthly sense. So it's having everything that you need. It's being in control or in charge, but not in a domineering way. It's in a, so like if you think about it, I always think of like a farmer essentially. I realize that's like not the king energy most people are going for, but like farmers understand how to work with the land, and it's a process. They know they do certain things, and then the earth and the plants do certain things, and there's an outcome, and they trust that process. And so, like, that's the energy that I really get for the King of Coins generally, but for this one specifically in this reading, is that like it's a process. You have to do your part. You have to put the energy in. You have to put the time in, but there's a payoff. The universe, the earth, your own self, like things will do what they need to do, and you will get to that point of transformation, of mastery, of abundance. But you got to put in the energy, and you have to go through the process. I also think like I always find it interesting in this deck. Hold on, I was so in the zone, I didn't realize that my battery is running low. So that could be a message for somebody, literally or figuratively. Your battery is running low. I think if you're going through a storm, you are probably feeling depleted. But again, so getting back to that mastery or king of coins, pentacles energy, that's not depleted. That's the opposite of depleted. So I think there's something there in tending to your batteries. But anyway, I was going to say, I find it interesting in this deck that the mastery or the king is a female presenting figure. Because even though, the king is normally a masculine energy, this depiction gives it a bit of a feminine spin for me. And feminine energy is more receptive. It's more, it's receiving more than doing. So again, I'm just getting that energy of like, you do the things early on, you put the energy in, and then you receive later. And I think so, like here we've got these two pentacles. She's holding them, but she's moving them, right? Like she doesn't have them, she's just moving them. And here, this one is just around her neck. So it's like you go from moving the energy to sort of owning the energy. Okay, then at the end here we have the teacher, which is the Hierophant, and the Seven of Wands. So anytime there's like a variation to the original, I really like checking the verbiage in the book because something often pops. So, sacred within a spiritual lineage, tradition, or teaching. Is it time to step up and begin to share your wisdom and gifts with others? Or it may be time to seek out a spiritual healer or teacher. Invites you to connect with a supportive spiritual community or take place in sacred ceremony. This may refer to a spiritual awakening. So, I mean, this could go a lot of ways. It could just be a bookend to the sort of awakening we saw here. So, like, this is the student and this is the teacher, essentially. You start this process of awakening, and then it achieves its fulfillment here at the end. Next to the High Priestess, I mean, I think there can definitely be a spiritual component to this. So if there is a spiritual practice or modality or something that you're starting to work with or interested in working in, that could be your Eight of Coins. This could be encouraging you to find a teacher in that space. It could also be you sort of reaching a position where you are more of a teacher instead of a student. But I think this could also be not so much spiritual as creative, because of the presence of the poet. So again, this could be you seeking out some sort of guidance or mentorship in a particular area, But it can also be like, I really keep coming back to that saying of like the student becoming the teacher. So it's like, as you go through this process, through this storm, you're the student. You're learning from the situation, you're learning from life, you're learning from yourself. Like you're taking all of those lessons in. And then as the teacher, as the poet, you have wisdom to give. So I have a thing about, personally, I don't trust anyone who thinks they know everything about anything. I don't care what kind of expert you are. In my experience, the smartest people I have ever met know how much they don't know. So when I see teacher, to me, that doesn't mean you are the all-knowing expert of everything. That means you know enough to share what you know, but you also know how much you don't know. So through this process, through what you go through, however that comes to life for you in terms of expression, whether that's, art, just sharing your voice, social media, blog, Substack, a book, public speaking, activism. Like there's so many ways that could come to life. And I think, especially after the High Priestess, this teacher card is the wisdom. It's knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know and being able to share those from a grounded place. So if you're talking in this side of things, that's not a grounded place. And again, that's not to say some of the things you're thinking or feeling aren't accurate or valid. They're not grounded. They're literally in the water. This is being able to share those things from a grounded place, from a higher perspective. I mean, you don't get a higher perspective than the High Priestess. So like, that is, you see way more than the forest, much bigger. And that enables you to share what you've learned from that perspective. And I think, so it may seem weird to have 7 of Wands under that, because that's usually like conflict and, sort of defending yourself. But I actually think that's the mastery. So this is very much the energy of being in the storm, whatever the storm is. So I don't care if you're fighting with your own like trauma and negative thought patterns, or if you have mental health issues like anxiety or depression. That's very much a battle. That very much conflict. If you are in conflict with another person, an institution, an entity, that is conflict. This teacher, like, compare the two. So it's interesting because the teacher here, we've got this Egyptian god. I don't know. I think it's Ra. Let me double check. Does it say? My Egyptian mythology is a little rusty. It doesn't say. I think it's Ra. It could be Horus. I don't know. But there's a staff here. There's a wand, if you will. If you wanted, you could use either sides of the hieroglyphs as wands. But this figure is seated. They're in control. They're sitting up, but their posture is pretty neutral. Like they're not active. They're just sitting there from their throne. That's a very different, like, look at, she's trying to hold on to all these wands at once, trying to get as many of them in front of her as she can. She's surrounded by flowers. It looks beautiful, but she's like fighting. This guy doesn't need to fight anymore. He understands what is and can, again, share that wisdom from a grounded place, literally a seated place, can say what is. It's not about conflict. It's mastery. So I think that's sort of the final act, I guess, of the storm, is that mastery. And so I don't know if that means mastery over yourself and those thoughts or the things you're battling with. I don't know if that means, mastery over certain patterns of conflict that, like, you've learned from. I don't know if it's, being able to speak to the person or situation or whatever directly from a place of wisdom and and groundedness instead of from a place of conflict, or if it's just being able to share what you've learned, what you know, from a place of knowledge and sort of openness, and not wounded or defensiveness. Like, that seems to be the final stage. So I was planning to pull some like oracle cards for advice at the end, um, but I don't think we need to. I think the story is pretty clear the way that the tarot came out. Um, so whatever the nature of the storm you're going through, sending you lots of love, because whatever it is, I can tell it's not fun. But I can also tell, and not in a patronizing way, it's not as bad as it seems. There are good things happening. They just look and probably feel really nasty right now. So, do your best to stay grounded, to stay balanced, to put in that energy into the little things, to taking care of yourself, and finding stillness, and looking for that different perspective, that higher perspective. And again, I think ultimately, and again, fully understanding that this is annoying as hell to hear when you're in it, but like, you gotta trust the process. Like, your wisdom knows this at some point, and in some capacity, this. There's a process unfolding. Do your part. It's not passive. It's not like sit back and it'll just happen. Like, there is work to be done here, but it's not all on you, and you really do have to surrender a little bit and trust to the process. So I hope this was helpful, for whatever storm you're going through. Hang in there, and I will see you next time. Bye.